The fluorescent lights of Miami International Airport cast harsh shadows across Maria Santos's face as she juggled her crying 6-month-old son, Diego, against her chest while dragging a battered suitcase behind her. The baby's wails echoed through the terminal, drawing annoyed glances from other travelers who clearly had places to be and patience to spare. Maria's free hand clutched a crumpled boarding pass for Flight 847 to Denver, her lifeline to what she desperately hoped would be a new beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Her husband Carlos had been gone for 8 months now, taken by a heart attack at just 28 years old while working his second job as a night security guard. The medical bills had consumed their modest savings faster than water disappearing into desert sand, and the life insurance payout had barely covered the funeral expenses. Now, with an eviction notice burning a hole in her purse, and her last paycheck from the cleaning company already spent on this flight, Maria was betting everything on her late husband's brother Miguel, who had promised her work at his restaurant. In Denver, the gate area buzzed with the controlled chaos of a delayed flight. Weather in Denver had pushed their departure back by 2 hours, and Maria could feel her anxiety climbing with each announcement. Diego hadn't slept properly in days, picking up on her stress and responding with endless crying that made her feel like the worst mother in the world. Other passengers were beginning to stare more openly now, their expressions ranging from sympathy to barely concealed irritation. Maria found an empty chair near the gate and sank into it, her legs trembling from exhaustion. She had been working 16-hour days for the past month, cleaning office buildings downtown during the day and houses in the suburbs at night, trying to scrape together enough money for this trip. Her supervisor at the cleaning company had been understanding about her situation, but understanding didn't pay the bills or keep the lights on. The baby formula in her diaper bag was running low, and she calculated in her head whether she had enough for the flight and the first few days in Denver. Miguel had promised to help, but pride and desperation warred in her chest. She had never been the type to ask for handouts, but circumstances had stripped away that luxury, along with everything else she had once taken for granted. A well-dressed businessman in the seat across from her was making no effort to hide his annoyance at Diego's crying. He kept glancing at his expensive watch and shaking his head, finally standing up to move to a different section of the gate area. The gesture stung more than it should have, reminding Maria of how far she had fallen from the life she and Carlos had been building together. They had met in college, both working multiple jobs to pay for their education. Carlos had been studying business management while working nights at a warehouse, and Maria had been pursuing her teaching degree while waitressing at a family restaurant near campus. Their love story had been built on shared dreams and mutual support, staying up late to help each other with homework and planning a future that seemed bright with possibility. After graduation, Carlos had landed a job at a logistics company, while Maria found work as a substitute teacher in the Miami-Dade school system. They had rented a small apartment in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy but clean and safe, with plans to save for a house once Maria secured a full-time teaching position. Diego's arrival had been a joyful surprise, even though it meant Maria had to put her career aspirations on hold temporarily. The heart attack had come without warning on a Tuesday night in October. Carlos had been at his second job, the security position he had taken to accelerate their savings for the house down payment, when a coworker found him collapsed in the parking lot. The paramedics had worked for 40 minutes to revive him, but the damage was too extensive. Maria had spent the next week in a fog of funeral arrangements and condolence visits, barely registering the stack of medical bills that began arriving in the mail. The life insurance policy through Carlos's primary job had a clause that reduced benefits for deaths occurring at secondary employment. The company's lawyers had been polite, but firm in explaining why the payout would be significantly less than anticipated. Maria had hired a lawyer with money she didn't have, but the contract was ironclad, and fighting it would have cost more than surrendering to the reduced settlement. Within 3 months, the medical bills had consumed the insurance money and most of their savings. Maria had returned to substitute teaching, but the irregular schedule and unpredictable income made it impossible to keep up with rent and utilities while caring for an infant. She had taken the cleaning jobs out of desperation, working whenever Diego was sleeping or when her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chun, could watch him for a few hours. Mrs. Chun had been a godsend during those dark months, appearing at Maria's door with homemade soup and offers to babysit whenever she sensed Maria was at her breaking point. The older woman had emigrated from Taiwan decades ago and understood the struggle of starting over in a new place with limited resources. It had been Mrs. Chun who suggested Maria reach out to Miguel in Denver, remembering conversations about Carlos's brother who had opened a successful restaurant. The phone call to Miguel had been one of the hardest conversations of Maria's life. She had never met her brother-in-law in person, only spoken to him briefly at the wedding and exchanged Christmas cards over the years. Carlos had always talked about visiting Denver, but money had been too tight for travel, and now those plans would never materialize. Miguel had been immediately welcoming, insisting that family took care of family and promising her both a job and a place to stay until she could get back on her feet. The boarding announcement finally came, and Maria gathered her belongings with shaking hands. Diego had exhausted himself crying and was now sleeping fitfully against her shoulder, his tiny fist clutched in her hair. She had dressed him in his best outfit for the trip, a little blue romper that Carlos had bought when Diego was born, hoping to make a good impression when they arrived in Denver. The line to board moved slowly, giving Maria time to observe her fellow passengers. Business travelers typed urgently on their phones. Vacation-goers chatted excitedly about their plans, and families corralled children and carry-on bags with practiced efficiency. Maria felt like an outsider looking in on a world where people had destinations and purposes, while she was simply running from one disaster toward an uncertain future. Her boarding pass indicated seat 32F, a middle seat in the back of the plane. She had booked the cheapest ticket available, using a credit card that was already maxed out and would need to be dealt with later. The flight attendant barely glanced at her boarding pass before waving her through, and Maria made her way down the narrow aisle toward the back of the aircraft. The plane was an older model with cramped seats and limited overhead storage. Maria struggled to lift her suitcase into the compartment, Diego's weight making the task nearly impossible. A teenage boy in the aisle seat watched her struggle without offering help, earbuds firmly in place and attention focused on his phone screen. Maria finally managed to wedge the suitcase into the bin, her arms aching from the effort. The middle seat was every bit as uncomfortable as she had anticipated. The businessman to her left had already claimed the armrest and was spreading his newspaper across his tray table, making it clear he had no interest in conversation. The teenager to her right had his knees drawn up and was completely absorbed in whatever game he was playing on his device. Diego stirred as Maria settled into her seat, his face scrunching up in preparation for another crying session. She quickly retrieved a bottle from her diaper bag, grateful that she had prepared it before boarding. The baby latched onto the bottle eagerly, his tiny hands grasping at her fingers as he drank. For a few precious minutes, the cabin was peaceful, filled only with the ambient noise of other passengers settling in and the flight crew preparing for departure. Maria closed her eyes and tried to imagine what Denver would be like. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Miguel had described his restaurant as a family-style Mexican place in a growing neighborhood, popular with both locals and tourists. He had promised her work as a waitress to start, with the possibility of more responsibility as she learned the business. The pay wouldn't be much initially, But he had also offered her the apartment above the restaurant at a reduced rent, which would solve her immediate housing crisis. The thought of starting over in a new city was both terrifying and liberating. Miami held too many memories of her life with Carlos, too many reminders of dreams that would never be fulfilled. Every street corner and familiar restaurant triggered waves of grief that threatened to overwhelm her already fragile emotional state. Denver represented a clean slate, a chance to build something new for herself and Diego without the constant weight of loss pressing down on her shoulders. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Maria felt a mixture of relief and anxiety wash over her. There was no turning back now. She had burned her bridges in Miami, surrendering her apartment and using her last resources for this journey. Success in Denver wasn't just preferable, it was essential for their survival. The takeoff was smooth, and Diego remained calm throughout. The ascent, occasionally looking up at Maria with wide, curious eyes. She marveled at his resilience, how he had adapted to the chaos of their circumstances without losing the bright spirit that reminded her so much of Carlos. Her husband had possessed that same ability to find joy in simple moments, to maintain optimism even when facing difficulties. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, and many passengers began settling in for the 3-hour flight. Maria tried to get comfortable in her cramped seat, but Diego's weight and the narrow space made it nearly impossible to find a position that didn't cause some part of her body to ache. The businessman beside her was already dozing, his newspaper folded neatly on his lap, while the teenager continued his gaming session with occasional muttered comments about his performance. The flight attendants began their beverage service, working their way down the aisle with practiced efficiency. When they reached Maria's row, she ordered a water and declined the offered snacks, mindful of her limited cash reserves. Every expense had to be carefully considered now, a stark contrast to the financial security she had once taken for granted. Diego finished his bottle and seemed content to lie in Maria's arms, occasionally reaching up to touch her face or grab at her long dark hair. She had been growing it out for over a year, initially planning to donate it to a charity that made wigs for cancer patients. The plan had been delayed by circumstances, but she still hoped to follow through with the donation once she was settled in Denver and could afford the salon visit. The weight of the baby combined with her own exhaustion began to take its toll as the flight progressed. Maria's eyelids grew heavy despite her efforts to stay alert, and she found herself dozing intermittently. Each time she startled awake, she worried about disturbing the passengers around her or dropping Diego, but the baby seemed perfectly content in her arms. About an hour into the flight, turbulence began rocking the aircraft more noticeably. The captain's voice came over the intercom, advising passengers to remain seated with their seatbelts fastened due to rough air ahead. Maria instinctively tightened, her grip on Diego, who remained remarkably calm despite the bouncing motion. The businessman beside her woke up as the plane hit a particularly strong bump, his newspaper sliding to the floor. He glanced at Maria and Diego with mild annoyance, as if their presence was somehow contributing to the turbulence. Maria offered an apologetic smile, but he had already returned his attention to retrieving his newspaper and adjusting his seatbelt. As the turbulence continued, Maria's exhaustion finally overcame her determination to stay vigilant. Her head began to nod forward, and despite her best efforts, she found herself drifting into the deep sleep of someone who had been running on adrenaline and willpower for far too long. Diego, secure in her arms and lulled by the motion of the aircraft, also succumbed to sleep, his breathing becoming slow and steady. The businessman finished reading his newspaper and prepared to settle in for a nap himself, but as he leaned back in his seat, he became aware of additional weight against his shoulder. Maria, deep in exhausted sleep, had unconsciously leaned toward him, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. Diego remained safely cradled in her arms, but the unexpected contact clearly caught the businessman off guard. For a moment, he seemed poised to wake her and reclaim his personal space. His hand moved toward her shoulder, ready to give her a gentle shake. But something in her peaceful expression, in the way she held her child even in sleep, made him pause. The dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights and worry, while her simple clothing and worn wedding ring told a story he was beginning to piece together. The businessman had been traveling frequently for over 15 years, and he had developed a keen eye for reading people during long flights. He could distinguish between the affluent leisure travelers, the stressed business commuters, the excited families heading to vacation destinations, and the occasional passenger who was traveling out of necessity rather than choice. Maria clearly fell into the latter category, and something about her situation stirred a memory he had tried to forget. 20 years ago, he had been in a similar position himself, young, widowed, and struggling to build a life for his infant daughter after his wife's death in a car accident. The details were different, but the desperation and exhaustion were universally recognizable. He remembered the weight of responsibility, the fear of making the wrong decision, and the bone-deep tiredness that came from carrying too much for too long. Instead of waking Maria, the businessman carefully adjusted his position to provide better support for her head. He retrieved a small pillow from the overhead compartment and gently placed it between his shoulder and the window, creating a more comfortable resting place. His movements were deliberate and quiet, designed not to disturb either the sleeping mother or her child. The flight attendant passing through the cabin noticed the scene and approached with a warm smile. She had witnessed many touching moments during her years of service, but there was something particularly moving about the businessman's quiet act of kindness. Without being asked, she retrieved a blanket from the galley and carefully draped it over Maria and Diego, tucking it around them to ensure they stayed warm. The businessman nodded his thanks to the flight attendant, then settled back to continue his own journey. He had been traveling to Denver for a business meeting, one of dozens he attended each year as part of his responsibilities as chief executive officer of a technology consulting firm. The meetings had become routine, the hotels interchangeable, and the constant travel had lost any sense of adventure years ago. But this flight felt different somehow. The sleeping woman and child beside him served as a reminder of what truly mattered in life, of the struggles that most people faced far from the boardrooms and five-star hotels that defined his current existence. He found himself wondering about their story, about what circumstances had led them to this late-night flight to Denver. As the plane continued through the night sky, the businessman made a decision that would change not only his own life, but the lives of the two strangers sleeping peacefully beside him. He quietly retrieved his phone and began typing an email to his assistant, outlining instructions for the morning that went far beyond his usual business communications. The turbulence gradually subsided, and the cabin settled into the quiet rhythm of a red-eye flight. Most passengers were now sleeping or resting with their eyes closed, while the flight attendants dimmed the lights further and moved through the aisles with minimal disturbance. The businessman remained awake, his mind racing with possibilities and plans that were taking shape with each passing mile. Maria slept deeply for the first time in weeks, her subconscious finally allowing her to rest completely. In her dreams, she was back in the small apartment she had shared with Carlos, cooking dinner while he played with Diego on the living room floor. The dream felt so real that she could smell the aroma of her husband's favorite meal and hear his laughter, mixing with the baby's happy gurgling sounds. Diego stirred occasionally in his mother's arms, but remained contentedly asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The businessman found himself studying the child's features, noting the strong resemblance to Maria in the shape of his eyes and the curve of his mouth. The baby's hands were curled into small fists, one clutching a corner of his blanket and the other resting against his mother's chest. The flight was now entering its final hour, but the businessman made no move to disturb his sleeping seatmates. Instead, he continued working on his phone, sending emails and making arrangements that would require significant resources and careful planning. His assistant would undoubtedly be surprised by the unusual nature of his requests, but she had worked with him long enough to know that he sometimes made decisions that didn't follow conventional business logic. As the plane began its descent toward Denver International Airport, the captain's voice came over the intercom with the standard announcement about preparing for landing. The cabin lights gradually brightened, and passengers began stirring from their rest. The businessman gently touched Maria's arm, speaking in a low voice to avoid startling her. Maria's eyes opened slowly, confusion evident as she realized she had been sleeping against a stranger's shoulder. She immediately tried to pull away, her face flushing with embarrassment as she mumbled apologies. Diego woke as well, blinking owlishly at the unfamiliar surroundings before focusing on his mother's face. The businessman smiled reassuringly, his voice gentle as he spoke for the first time during the flight. "Please don't apologize. You both needed the rest." His tone carried a warmth that surprised Maria, who had expected irritation or annoyance at the unintended intimacy. As the plane touched down in Denver and taxied toward the gate, Maria gathered her belongings and prepared to face whatever awaited her in this new city. She had no idea that the man whose shoulder she had slept on was about to change her life in ways she couldn't imagine, or that this chance encounter would lead to discoveries that would transform not only her own future, but also reveal connections to a past she had thought was lost forever. The businessman watched as Maria struggled to organize her diaper bag and prepare Diego for deplaning, noting the careful way she counted the remaining diapers and formula. His decision was solidified by these small observations, these glimpses into a life lived on the margins of financial survival. Tomorrow would bring revelations and opportunities that neither of them could anticipate. But tonight, a simple act of kindness had planted the seeds for a transformation that would ripple through multiple lives. The Denver International Airport terminal buzzed with late-night activity as passengers from Flight 847 made their way through the arrival gate. Maria Santos shifted Diego to her other hip while reaching for her phone to call Miguel, but her heart sank when she saw 3 missed calls from her brother-in-law and a text message that made her stomach drop. "Emergency at restaurant. Kitchen fire. We'll call you tomorrow." "So sorry." The businessman from the flight noticed her distress as they walked through the terminal together. He had been observing her carefully since she woke up, noting the way she checked and rechecked her phone, the slight tremor in her hands as she gathered her belongings, and now the look of panic crossing her face as she read the message. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine concern. Maria looked up at him, the stranger who had shown her unexpected kindness during the flight, and felt tears threatening to spill over. She had held herself together through months of struggle, but this final setback felt like more than she could bear. "My brother-in-law was supposed to pick me up," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's been some kind of emergency at his restaurant. I don't know anyone else here, and I don't have money for a hotel." The admission felt like defeat, acknowledging her complete vulnerability to someone she had just met. The businessman stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I'm Robert Chun," he said, extending his hand. "And I'd like to help if you'll let me." Maria stared at him in surprise. Chun was Mrs. Chun's surname, her elderly neighbor who had been so kind during her darkest months in Miami. The coincidence seemed too strange to be random. "Maria Santos," she replied, shaking his hand tentatively. "Did you say Chun?" "I have a friend in Miami with that name." Robert's eyebrows raised slightly, and he smiled with what appeared to be recognition. "Mrs. Lily Chun, by any chance? Lives in the Coral Gables area?" Maria's eyes widened in shock. How could this businessman possibly know her neighbor? "She's my aunt," Robert continued. "She mentioned a young woman named Maria, who had been helping her with groceries and errands. She was quite fond of you. The revelation left Maria speechless. Of all the passengers on that flight, of all the seats she could have been assigned, she had ended up next to the nephew of the one person who had shown her consistent kindness in recent months. The odds seemed impossible, yet here they were. Standing in a Denver airport at midnight, connected by bonds neither had known existed. She never mentioned having family in Denver, Maria said, still trying to process the coincidence. Robert's expression grew slightly sad, and he shifted his weight before responding. Aunt Lily and I haven't spoken much in recent years. Business kept me too busy, and I was too proud to maintain family relationships the way I should have. She sent me photos of you and Diego once, along with a letter about how you'd been taking care of her. I should have reached out then, but I kept telling myself I'd call next week, next month. He paused, looking directly at Maria. She told me about your husband's death, about how hard you've been working to take care of your son. Maria felt a flush of embarrassment mixed with gratitude. Mrs. Chun had been talking about her to family members, sharing her struggles with people she didn't even know existed. It felt like an invasion of privacy and a tremendous kindness. Simultaneously, she's been like a grandmother to Diego, Maria said softly. I don't know how I would have managed these past months without her help. Robert nodded, his expression thoughtful as he watched Diego sleeping peacefully in Maria's arms. Then let me return some of the kindness she's shown you. My house has plenty of room, and my guest quarters are completely private. You and Diego can stay there until you sort things out with your brother-in-law. The offer was generous beyond anything Maria had expected, but accepting help from strangers felt dangerous, especially when she was responsible for Diego's safety. I couldn't impose like that, she protested. You don't really know me, and I don't want to be a burden. Robert smiled, the same warm expression she had seen from Mrs. Chun countless times when the older woman had insisted on helping despite Maria's protests. Aunt Lily would never forgive me if I left you stranded at the airport. Besides, I have a feeling this meeting isn't entirely coincidental. He gestured toward the baggage claim area. Let's get your luggage, and I'll explain. More on the drive. The ride through Denver's streets gave Maria her first glimpse of her new city. Even at this late hour, the downtown skyline was impressive, with modern buildings illuminated against the backdrop of distant mountains. Robert drove a sleek silver sedan that smelled of leather and expensive cologne, a stark contrast to the cramped airplane cabin where they had first encountered each other. Tell me about your brother-in-law's restaurant, Robert said as they navigated through light traffic. What kind of food? What neighborhood? Maria provided what details she knew, describing Miguel's description of the family-style Mexican restaurant and its location in a growing area popular with young professionals. I know the area well, Robert replied. It's been gentrifying rapidly over the past few years. Property values have increased significantly, which is good for established businesses, but challenging for new ones trying to get started. Something in his tone suggested he had more than casual knowledge of the restaurant industry, but Maria was too tired to probe deeper. Robert's house was located in the Cherry Hills Village area, an upscale suburb south of downtown Denver. The neighborhood featured mature trees and spacious lots, with houses that spoke of established wealth rather than flashy displays of success. When they pulled into his driveway, Maria could see enough of the property to understand that Robert Chun was considerably more successful than she had initially realized. The house itself was a sprawling contemporary structure that seemed to blend seamlessly with its natural surroundings. Large windows reflected the landscape lighting that illuminated carefully maintained gardens and a circular driveway. Maria clutched Diego closer as they approached the front door, feeling increasingly out of place in this environment of obvious prosperity. The guest quarters are around back, Robert explained, leading them along a stone pathway. Completely separate entrance, full kitchen, 2 bedrooms. My housekeeper stocks the refrigerator twice a week, so you should find everything you need. The guest house was larger than the apartment Maria had shared with Carlos, beautifully furnished, with comfortable furniture and artwork that suggested careful curation rather than decorator showmanship. "This is incredibly generous," Maria said as Robert showed her the layout. "I don't know how to thank you." She was fighting tears again, overwhelmed by the kindness of this virtual stranger who was treating her with more consideration than some of her own relatives had shown during her recent struggles. "Get some rest," Robert replied gently. "We can talk more in the morning. There's a phone in the kitchen if you need anything during the night, and my number is programmed into it." He paused at the door, studying Maria's face in the soft lighting. "I'm curious about something. You mentioned earlier that you don't know anyone in Denver besides your brother-in-law. What kind of work were you doing in Miami?" Maria hesitated, unsure how much personal information to share. "I was substitute teaching and work in cleaning jobs. Before Diego was born, I was trying to get a full-time teaching position. The admission felt inadequate, a poor summary of dreams that had been derailed by circumstances beyond her control." "What subject did you teach?" Robert's interest seemed genuine rather than polite conversation, and Maria found herself relaxing slightly. "Elementary education, with a focus on bilingual instruction. I speak fluent Spanish and English, and there's a real need for teachers who can work effectively with diverse student populations." As she spoke, Maria felt a flicker of the passion that had originally drawn her to education, the belief that she could make a meaningful difference in children's lives. "The Denver School District has a significant Hispanic population," Robert observed. "There's probably substantial demand for qualified bilingual teachers here." Something in his tone suggested he had specific knowledge about the local educational landscape, but Maria was too exhausted to pursue the conversation further. After Robert left, Maria explored the guest house more thoroughly. The kitchen was indeed well stocked with high-quality ingredients and basic necessities. The refrigerator contained fresh milk, perfect for preparing Diego's bottles, along with bread, eggs, fruit, and other staples. The master bedroom featured a king-sized bed with luxurious linens, while the second bedroom had been converted into an office with a computer and printer. Maria prepared a bottle for Diego and settled into a comfortable chair in the living room to feed him. The baby was hungry and fussy after the long travel day, but he quickly calmed once he began eating. Through the large windows, Maria could see the main house where lights were still on in what appeared to be a home office. Robert Chun was apparently still working despite the late hour. As Diego finished his bottle and drifted back to sleep, Maria allowed herself to truly process the day's events. 24 hours ago, she had been facing eviction in Miami with no clear path forward. Now she was sitting in luxury accommodations in Denver, cared for by a stranger who happened to be connected to the one person who had shown her consistent kindness during her darkest period. The coincidence of meeting Mrs. Chun's nephew felt like more than random chance. Maria had never been particularly religious, but her mother had raised her to believe that sometimes the universe provided exactly what was needed at the moment it was most required. Tonight felt like one of those moments. Though she couldn't shake the feeling that there were layers to this situation she hadn't yet understood. She put Diego in the crib that had been set up in the master bedroom, marveling at the quality of the baby furniture that Robert had somehow arranged to have available. Either he was exceptionally prepared for unexpected guests, or he had made some very quick phone calls during their brief time at the airport. The level of thoughtfulness and preparation suggested someone accustomed to solving complex problems efficiently. Despite her exhaustion, Maria found it difficult to fall asleep immediately. The bed was unbelievably comfortable, but her mind raced with questions about her benefactor and concerns about her situation with Miguel. The text message about the kitchen fire had been brief and lacking in details. Was it a minor incident that would be resolved quickly, or a major disaster that would eliminate her job opportunity entirely. She retrieved her phone and composed several text messages to Miguel, each one deleted before sending as she struggled to find the right balance of concern and understanding. Finally, she settled on a simple message expressing her hope that everyone was safe and asking him to call when he had time to discuss the situation. The guest house was remarkably quiet, insulated from street noise by mature landscaping and quality construction. Maria could hear the gentle hum of the heating system and the occasional settling sounds of an well-built house, but otherwise silence surrounded her. It was a stark contrast to her apartment in Miami, where traffic noise and neighbors' conversations had provided constant background sound. Around 3 in the morning, she was startled awake by the sound of her phone ringing. Miguel's name appeared on the screen, and Maria quickly answered before the noise could wake Diego. "Maria, I'm so sorry about tonight," Miguel's voice was hoarse with exhaustion and stress. "The fire started in the kitchen ventilation system. We caught it before it spread too far, but the damage is extensive. The insurance adjuster won't be here until Monday, and I won't know about repairs or reopening until then." Maria's heart sank as she listened to the details. The restaurant would be closed indefinitely while repairs were completed and equipment was replaced. Miguel's own apartment had suffered smoke and water damage from the firefighting efforts, and he was staying with friends across town. "What does this mean for the job you offered me?" Maria asked, dreading the answer but needing to understand her options. "I want to honor my commitment to you," Miguel replied. "But honestly, I don't know when we'll be able to reopen or if the insurance will cover all the costs. It could be weeks or even months before I can offer you steady employment." The defeat in his voice was evident, and Maria could hear the weight of his own concerns about the business he had worked years to build. "I understand," Maria said, though her mind was already racing through the implications. She had no job prospects in Denver, no savings to sustain herself during an extended period of uncertainty, and now no immediate family support to rely on. The guest house where she was staying was a temporary refuge, but she couldn't impose on Robert Chun's generosity indefinitely. "Give me a few days to assess the damage and talk to the insurance company," Miguel continued. "Maybe I can find you something temporary with other restaurant owners I know. The industry here is pretty tight-knit, and word gets around when someone needs help." After ending the call, Maria sat in the darkness of the unfamiliar bedroom, holding her sleeping son and contemplating their options. Returning to Miami was financially impossible with her credit cards maxed out and no money for airline tickets. She had severed ties with her former life, giving up her apartment and selling most of their possessions to fund this move. The morning light filtering through the guest house windows revealed the stunning mountain views that surrounded Robert's property. Maria prepared coffee in the well-appointed kitchen, while Diego played contentedly on a blanket she had spread on the living room floor. The baby seemed to have adapted to their new surroundings with the resilience that children often displayed, chattering happily to himself as he explored toys that had mysteriously appeared overnight. A soft knock at the door announced Robert's arrival with fresh pastries and newspapers. He was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking more approachable than he had in his business attire the previous evening. His greeting was warm but respectful, acknowledging that this was now Maria's temporary space. "How did you sleep?" he asked, settling into a chair across from where Maria sat with her coffee. "I saw the light on very late and wondered if everything was all right." Maria explained Miguel's call and the situation with the restaurant, watching Robert's expression carefully for signs of impatience or concern about extended house guests. Instead, she saw genuine sympathy and what appeared to be active consideration of the problem. "Restaurant fires are unfortunately common," Robert said thoughtfully. "The combination of high-heat cooking equipment, grease, and older ventilation systems create significant risks. The recovery time depends heavily on the extent of the damage and the quality of the insurance coverage. You seem to know a lot about the restaurant business, Maria observed. Robert smiled, and for the first time since they had met, his expression carried a hint of mystery. I know a lot about several businesses, actually. That's what happens when you spend your career acquiring and improving companies across different industries. The casual statement revealed more about Robert's professional status than anything he had shared previously. He wasn't just successful. He was operating at a level of business sophistication that Maria had only read about in magazines. What kind of companies? She asked, curiosity overcoming her natural reticence about prying into personal matters. Technology consulting, primarily, but also hospitality, real estate development, and lately, educational services. The last category caught Maria's attention immediately, and Robert noticed her reaction. You mentioned your background in bilingual education. There's a significant opportunity in Denver for someone with your qualifications. Over the next hour, Robert explained the demographic changes occurring in Denver and the surrounding suburbs. The Hispanic population had grown substantially in recent years, creating demand for educational services that many school districts were struggling to meet. Federal and state funding was available for programs that could demonstrate effective bilingual instruction methods, but finding qualified teachers remained a persistent challenge. I've been exploring the acquisition of several education-related businesses, Robert continued. Tutoring services, test preparation companies, language instruction programs. There's a particular opportunity in developing curriculum and training programs for bilingual education that I think could be very successful. Maria listened with growing excitement as Robert outlined possibilities she hadn't considered. Her teaching experience, combined with her personal understanding of the challenges facing Hispanic families, could be valuable in ways that extended beyond traditional classroom instruction. Would you be interested in consulting on a project like that? Robert asked. I could use someone with your background to help evaluate potential acquisitions and develop program strategies. The offer was presented casually, but Maria sensed that Robert had been considering this possibility since their conversation the previous evening. I don't have any business experience, Maria protested. I've never worked on anything beyond classroom instruction and curriculum development. Experience can be learned, Robert replied. Understanding and passion are much harder to teach. And you clearly have both. He paused, studying her expression carefully. This wouldn't be charity, Maria. I genuinely believe you could contribute significant value to these projects. The conversation was interrupted by Diego, who had crawled over to Robert's chair and was attempting to pull himself up using the man's pant leg. Robert reached down and gently lifted the baby, holding him with the practiced ease of someone comfortable around children. You're very good with him, Maria observed, surprised by how naturally Robert interacted with Diego. Do you have children of your own? Robert's expression grew wistful as he bounced Diego gently on his knee. I have a daughter, Rebecca. She's 22 now, finishing her master's degree at Stanford. We don't see each other as often as we should. There was regret in his voice, the acknowledgement of choices made and opportunities missed. What does she study? Maria asked, recognizing the pride that crept into Robert's voice, despite his regret about their relationship. Educational psychology with a focus on early childhood development. She wants to work with disadvantaged communities, helping kids who face the kind of challenges you've been dealing with. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Robert's daughter was pursuing work that would help people like Maria, while Robert himself had been too focused on business success to maintain their close relationship. As the morning progressed, Maria found herself sharing more details about her background and aspirations than she had intended. Robert proved to be an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated genuine interest rather than polite conversation. He seemed particularly intrigued by her descriptions of the bilingual students she had worked with, in Miami and the creative teaching methods she had developed to help them succeed. You should meet Rebecca when she comes home for spring break. Next month, Robert suggested. I think you two would have a lot to discuss about educational approaches and community outreach. The invitation felt significant, an acknowledgement that he was thinking about Maria's presence in his life, extending beyond this immediate crisis. Around noon, Robert's phone rang with what appeared to be an important business call. He excused himself to take it privately, leaving Maria alone with Diego and her own thoughts about the unexpected directions her life was taking. 24 hours ago, she had been a desperate single mother fleeing Miami with no prospects beyond Miguel's uncertain offer. Now she was discussing potential business opportunities with a successful entrepreneur who seemed genuinely interested in her ideas and experiences. The call lasted nearly an hour, and when Robert returned, his expression was thoughtful and somewhat excited. That was my development manager, he explained. We've been negotiating to acquire a chain of tutoring centers that serves primarily Hispanic communities throughout Colorado and New Mexico. The current owners want to retire, and we're in final discussions about the purchase terms. What would you do with tutoring centers? Maria asked, genuinely curious about how such an acquisition would fit into Robert's business portfolio. Expand their services and improve their effectiveness, Robert replied immediately. Most tutoring operations focus solely on academic support, but the families they serve often need much broader assistance. Language instruction for parents, college preparation guidance, career counseling, even basic financial literacy education. Maria could see the vision he was describing, having worked with families who faced exactly those challenges. That's a comprehensive approach, she said. Most school districts don't have resources to provide that kind of holistic support. Exactly, Robert agreed. But a private organization with proper funding and effective leadership could fill that gap while operating profitably. He paused, watching Maria's expression carefully. I'd like you to visit some of these centers with me this week. Get your perspective on their current operations and your ideas about how they could be improved. The proposal was both exciting and terrifying. Maria had never been involved in business evaluation or strategic planning, but the opportunity to influence programs that could help families like her own was incredibly appealing. What would my role be, exactly? She asked. Educational consultant to start with, Robert replied. Help me understand what these families really need and how we can design programs to meet those needs effectively. If the acquisition goes forward and you're interested, we could discuss a more permanent position developing and managing expanded services. Maria felt her heart racing with possibility. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a chance to build something meaningful while supporting herself and Diego independently. I'd like to try, she said quietly. I'd like to learn whether I can contribute to something like this. Robert smiled, the same warm expression she had seen from Mrs. Chun when the older woman was pleased with Maria's decisions. Then we'll start tomorrow, he said. I'll arrange for you to visit 3 different tutoring centers and meet with their current staff. Take notes, ask questions, observe everything you can about how they operate and who they serve. As the afternoon wore on, Maria felt herself relaxing into the possibility that this unexpected turn in her life might lead to opportunities she had never imagined. Robert proved to be engaging company, sharing stories about his various business ventures while asking perceptive questions about Maria's experiences and observations. The conversation was interrupted by another call from Miguel, this one bearing slightly better news. The fire damage was less extensive than initially feared, though the restaurant would still be closed for several weeks while equipment was replaced and renovations were completed. More importantly, Miguel had spoken with 2 other restaurant owners who might have temporary work available for Maria if she was interested. That's wonderful news, Maria told her brother-in-law. though she found herself less enthusiastic about returning to waitressing than she would have been just days earlier. The conversations with Robert had opened her mind to possibilities beyond the survival-focused thinking that had dominated her life since Carlos's death. The jobs wouldn't pay much, Miguel warned. Mostly part-time work until tourist season starts in earnest. But it would be something to help you get established here. Maria thanked Miguel for his efforts while privately wondering whether she should pursue these restaurant opportunities or focus entirely on the potential consulting work with Robert. The prudent choice would be to accept whatever employment was available immediately, but something about Robert's project felt like it could lead to more substantial long-term prospects. After ending the call, she shared Miguel's news with Robert, who listened thoughtfully before offering his perspective. Restaurant work would provide immediate income, he acknowledged, but it would also consume most of your time and energy, making it difficult to pursue other opportunities. I can't afford to turn down income when I have Diego to support, Maria replied practically. I need to be realistic about my situation. I understand, Robert said. But consider this. I'm prepared to offer you a consulting fee for the work you do with me this week, regardless of whether the tutoring center acquisition proceeds. That would give you some financial breathing room while you explore whether this kind of work appeals to you. The offer was generous beyond anything Maria had expected, but accepting it would mean trusting Robert's assessment of her potential value as a consultant. She had learned to be cautious about arrangements that seemed too good to be true, having been disappointed by promises that failed to materialize in the past. Why are you willing to invest so much in someone you barely know? She asked directly. What do you see in me that I don't see in myself? Robert considered the question seriously before responding. You remind me of my daughter, actually. Not in appearance, but in your combination of intelligence, determination, and genuine concern for other people's welfare. Rebecca has that same quality of being able to see possibilities for helping others, even when she's facing her own challenges. The comparison to his daughter felt significant, suggesting that Robert's interest in Maria's success extended beyond mere business considerations. I'd like to meet her, Maria said impulsively. Your daughter sounds like someone I'd enjoy knowing. I hope you'll have that opportunity, Robert replied. I think she could benefit from knowing you as well. She's sometimes too idealistic about working with disadvantaged communities. Your practical experience could help her understand the realities of what families like yours actually face. As evening approached, Maria realized that her first day in Denver had transformed her outlook completely. Instead of feeling desperate and uncertain about her future, she was beginning to see possibilities that extended far beyond mere survival. The consulting opportunity with Robert represented a chance to build expertise and experience that could lead to meaningful career advancement. Diego had spent the afternoon alternately playing with Robert and napping in Maria's arms, seeming perfectly content with their new surroundings. The baby's easy adaptation to change reminded Maria of her own resilience, her ability to embrace new circumstances when they offered hope for improvement. I'd like to accept your consulting offer, Maria told Robert as they prepared dinner together in the guest house kitchen. I want to learn whether I can contribute effectively to the kind of work you're describing. Robert's smile was immediate and genuine. I'm glad, he said simply. I have a feeling this partnership is going to benefit both of us more than either of us realizes right now. As they shared a simple meal while Diego played nearby, Maria felt gratitude for the series of coincidences that had brought her to this point. The sleeping stranger on the airplane had become a mentor and potential business partner, opening doors to opportunities she hadn't known existed. Tomorrow would bring her first formal introduction to Robert's business world, but tonight she was content to simply enjoy the peace and security of their temporary sanctuary. For the first time since Carlos's death, Maria felt hopeful about the future she was building for herself and her son. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Esperanza Learning Center as Robert's sedan pulled into a space near the front entrance. Maria adjusted Diego in his car seat while studying the modest brick building that housed one of the tutoring centers Robert was considering for acquisition. The neighborhood was clearly working class, with small houses and apartment complexes. That reminded her of the areas where she had worked in Miami. "This center serves about 200 students," Robert explained as they gathered their belongings. "Mostly elementary and middle school age, though they have some high school programs as well." The owner, Carmen Rodriguez, started it 15 years ago when she couldn't find adequate tutoring services for her own children. He paused, watching Maria's reaction to the familiar-sounding story. "She's built it into one of the most successful independent tutoring operations in the state." Maria carried Diego while Robert managed the diaper bag and her notebook, a gesture that had become natural over the past few days. Their easy coordination spoke to the comfortable working relationship that had developed surprisingly quickly. Though Maria sometimes caught herself wondering about the boundaries between professional collaboration and personal friendship, Carmen Rodriguez greeted them at the entrance with the warmth of someone genuinely passionate about her work. She was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and laugh lines that spoke of years spent working with children. Her handshake was firm, and her immediate attention to Diego suggested someone comfortable with the realities of working mothers. "Welcome to Esperanza," Carmen said, leading them through hallways decorated with student artwork and achievement certificates. "Mr. Chen told me you have experience in bilingual education. I'm eager to hear your thoughts about what we're doing here." The request felt both flattering and intimidating, as Maria realized that her opinions would influence significant business decisions. The tour began in the main tutoring area, where students ranging from 6 to 16 worked at tables, with volunteer tutors and paid staff members. The atmosphere was focused but relaxed, with quiet conversations in both English and Spanish, creating a comfortable background hum. Maria noticed immediately that the facility was clean and well organized, though clearly operating with limited resources. "Most of our students come here after regular school hours," Carmen explained. "Their parents work late shifts or multiple jobs, so we provide homework help, test preparation, and enrichment activities until evening pickup time. We also offer weekend programs for families who need additional support." Maria watched the interactions between tutors and students, noting the patience and skill displayed by the staff members. She recognized the particular challenges of working with children who were navigating between languages and cultures, having faced similar situations in her own teaching experience. The quality of instruction appeared high despite the modest surroundings. "What's your biggest operational challenge?" Robert asked, his question directed toward Carmen, but his attention clearly on Maria's reactions to what she was observing. "Funding consistency," Carmen replied without hesitation. "We operate on a combination of parent fees, grants, and donations. The grants are competitive and time-consuming to manage, while many of our families struggle to pay full fees. We provide sliding scale pricing, but that creates budget unpredictability." Maria found herself mentally cataloging observations and questions as they moved through different areas of the facility. The computer lab was outdated but functional, with older machines that students used for typing practice and basic research. Skills. The library corner featured books in both English and Spanish, though the collection showed signs of heavy use and limited replacement budgets. "Tell me about your staff," Maria interjected, addressing Carmen directly. "How do you recruit and retain qualified tutors?" The question felt natural, drawing on her own experience with the challenges of finding effective educational support. "That's our second biggest challenge," Carmen admitted. "We rely heavily on volunteers, many of whom are college students or retirees. They're well-meaning, but they don't always have the training to work effectively with students who are dealing with language barriers or learning difficulties. She gestured toward a young woman working patiently with a third grader on math. Problems: finding people who understand both the academic content and the cultural context is extremely difficult. Robert made notes on his phone while Maria continued her informal assessment of the operation. She was impressed by the obvious dedication of the staff and the genuine progress being made by the students, but she could also see numerous opportunities for improvement and expansion. Diego had been content to observe the activity from his stroller, but he began to fuss as they entered the preschool area where younger children were engaged in structured play activities. One of the staff members, a young Latina woman named Sofia, immediately approached with a warm smile. "Puedo cargarlo?" Sofia asked, gesturing toward Diego. Maria hesitated briefly before agreeing, noting how naturally Sofia interacted with the baby and how quickly Diego settled in her arms. The easy multilingual environment reminded Maria of her own childhood, where switching between languages was natural and unforced. "Sofia is one of our best early childhood specialists," Carmen explained. "She has her degree in elementary education, but chose to work here rather than in the public school system. We can't pay her what she'd earn elsewhere, but she believes in the mission." Maria engaged Sofia in conversation about her background and approach to working with bilingual children. The young woman's responses revealed both solid educational training and intuitive understanding of the challenges facing Hispanic families in predominantly English-speaking environments. Her insights about language development and cultural identity resonated strongly with Maria's own experiences and observations. "How long have you been working here?" Maria asked, genuinely curious about Sofia's career path and motivations. 3 years, Sofia replied, gently bouncing Diego as she spoke. "I started as a volunteer while finishing my degree, and Carmen offered me a full-time position when I graduated. The work is incredibly rewarding, even though the pay is limited." There was no bitterness in her voice, only the resignation of someone who had made conscious choices about priorities. Robert stepped closer to Maria, speaking quietly so their conversation wouldn't be overheard. "What are you thinking so far? First impressions?" His question felt like a test of her ability to provide useful business analysis, but also reflected genuine interest in her professional opinion. "The quality of the work is excellent," Maria replied carefully. "But they're clearly operating at capacity with limited resources. There's tremendous potential for expansion if adequate funding could be secured." She paused, watching the interactions around them. "The staff expertise is strong, but they need more training support and competitive compensation to retain good people." "Agreed," Robert said. "What about the physical facilities? Infrastructure needs?" His follow-up question suggested he was already thinking about implementation challenges and investment requirements. Maria pointed out the obvious infrastructure limitations while acknowledging the creative ways Carmen had maximized the available space. The building was well maintained but clearly too small for the demand it was trying to meet. Several programs were operating in shared spaces, and there was no room for expansion of services without additional facilities. As they concluded the tour, Carmen invited them to observe an evening family session where parents joined their children for English language instruction and homework support. Maria was particularly interested in this program, having seen firsthand how parental engagement could accelerate student progress. "We offer these sessions 3 times per week," Carmen explained. "Parents practice English conversation while helping their children with homework. It creates a learning community that extends beyond just academic tutoring." The concept was simple but powerful, addressing multiple family needs simultaneously. The family session was eye-opening for Maria, who recognized many similarities between these families and her own experiences as a young mother trying to navigate educational systems. Parents arrived directly from work, many still wearing uniforms from restaurant or cleaning jobs, but their dedication to their children's education was evident in their tired but focused participation. Robert observed quietly from the back of the room while Maria found herself naturally gravitating toward individual families, offering assistance with homework problems and engaging in conversations that revealed her intuitive understanding of their circumstances. Her bilingual skills and educational background made her immediately useful, while her recent experience as a struggling single mother created instant credibility with the parents. "You're very good at this," Robert commented as they prepared to leave. "I watched you connect with those families in ways that took our regular staff months to develop." His observation felt both encouraging and slightly overwhelming, as Maria realized the weight of responsibility that would come with any formal role in this organization. The drive back to Robert's house provided an opportunity for deeper discussion about what they had observed and the potential for improvement. Maria found herself sharing ideas that surprised her with their sophistication and practicality, drawing on her teaching experience but extending it into areas she hadn't previously considered. "What would you change first if you were managing that operation?" Robert asked as they navigated through evening traffic. Diego had fallen asleep in his car seat, creating a peaceful environment for serious conversation. "Staff development and compensation," Maria replied immediately. "Carmen has built an excellent foundation, but she's losing good people because they can't afford to stay. Sophia should be earning twice what she's making now, and there should be clear advancement opportunities for dedicated staff members." The response felt natural, though Maria was surprised by her own confidence in offering business opinions. "What about program expansion?" Robert pressed. "If funding weren't a constraint, what additional services would you recommend?" His questions were pushing her to think beyond immediate operational issues toward strategic vision and long-term planning. Maria considered the question seriously, drawing on her observations from the day as well as her own experiences with the challenges facing Hispanic families. "Adult education programs beyond just English conversation," she began. "Financial literacy, computer skills, college preparation for parents who want to continue their own education. Also more comprehensive support for students transitioning into high school and college." "Those are exactly the kinds of programs I was envisioning," Robert said with obvious satisfaction. "You're thinking about holistic family support rather than just academic tutoring." His approval felt validating, but Maria remained cautious about becoming too invested in possibilities that might not materialize. They stopped for dinner at a small Mexican restaurant that Robert recommended, continuing their discussion over plates of food that reminded Maria of family meals from her childhood. The casual atmosphere made their conversation feel less like a business meeting and more like a collaboration between friends sharing ideas and aspirations. "Can I ask you something personal?" Maria said as they shared flan for dessert. "Why is this kind of work important to you? You could invest in any number of businesses that would be more profitable and less complicated." The question had been bothering her since their first discussion about the tutoring centers. Robert was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful as he considered how much personal information to share. "My daughter Rebecca has been volunteering with similar programs throughout college," he began slowly. "She's passionate about educational equity and social justice, and she's made me more aware of the systemic barriers that families like yours face." "But there's more to it than that," Maria observed, sensing deeper motivations behind his interest in educational ventures. "My own family immigrated from Taiwan when I was 12, Robert admitted. My parents worked multiple jobs while trying to learn English and navigate American school systems. I remember the struggle, the feeling of being caught between two worlds without adequate support in either one." His voice carried traces of old frustration and determination. The personal revelation helped Maria understand Robert's commitment to the tutoring center project. His success hadn't distanced him from the challenges facing immigrant families. Instead, it had positioned him to address those challenges more effectively than most people could manage. "What happened to your parents?" Maria asked gently. "Did they eventually find the support they needed?" "My father became an engineer, and my mother taught piano lessons to supplement their income. They succeeded through sheer determination and some fortunate connections with people who helped them navigate the system." Robert paused, his expression growing sad. "But it was much harder than it needed to be. There weren't organizations like Carmen Center available when we needed them." "So this is personal for you," Maria concluded. "Not just a business opportunity, but a chance to provide what your own family didn't have access to." "Exactly," Robert confirmed. "And I think that's why your perspective is so valuable. You understand both the educational challenges and the practical realities of being a single mother trying to build a better life for your child." The conversation continued as they drove home, with Maria sharing more details about her own family background and the factors that had led her to pursue bilingual education as a career. She talked about her grandmother, who had never learned English despite living in the United States for 40 years, and her own determination to help bridge cultural and linguistic gaps for other families. "There's something I want to show you when we get back to the house," Robert said as they pulled into his driveway. "Some research materials I've been collecting about educational programs in other markets. I'd value your input on what's been working elsewhere." The main house was elegant but comfortable, with contemporary furnishings that somehow managed to feel warm rather than intimidating. Robert led Maria to his home office, a spacious room lined with books and equipped with multiple computer monitors and a conference table covered with documents and reports. "These are feasibility studies for similar programs in Phoenix, San Antonio, and Los Angeles," Robert explained, gesturing toward organized stacks of papers. "I want to understand what approaches have been most successful before we commit to any specific strategy here in Denver." Maria spent the next hour reviewing materials that revealed the scope of Robert's research and planning. He had been investigating educational ventures for over a year, consulting with experts and analyzing demographic trends across multiple markets. The thoroughness of his preparation was both impressive and slightly overwhelming. "You've been planning this for a long time," Maria observed, looking up from a detailed demographic analysis of Hispanic populations in Western states. "This isn't just a recent interest sparked by meeting me." "No, but meeting you has crystallized my thinking about implementation," Robert replied. "I've been looking for someone with the right combination of educational expertise and personal understanding of the target population. Most education consultants have theoretical knowledge, but lack practical experience with the day-to-day challenges these families face." The compliment felt significant, but Maria remained cautious about accepting too much responsibility too quickly. "I'm still learning about the business side of these operations," she reminded him. "My experience is limited to classroom instruction and working with individual families." "Business skills can be taught," Robert said, echoing his earlier comment about experience versus passion. "What matters most is that you understand the mission and have the credibility to connect effectively with the families we want to serve." As the evening progressed, Maria found herself increasingly excited about the possibilities Robert was describing. The combination of meaningful work and professional growth appealed to her strongly, offering a path toward independence that went far beyond mere economic survival. Diego woke up and needed attention, providing a natural break in their intense discussion. Robert offered to prepare a bottle while Maria changed the baby's diaper, another small gesture that demonstrated his comfort with the practical realities of her situation as a single mother. "Have you thought about childcare arrangements if you decide to work with me more formally?" Robert asked as Maria fed Diego in the comfortable chair by his office window. "Most consulting work requires irregular schedules and occasional travel. I haven't had to think about full-time childcare since Carlos died," Maria admitted. "I've been managing with part-time arrangements and working around Diego's schedule. A regular job would require more structured care." There are excellent daycare facilities near the tutoring centers, Robert suggested. Some of them even offer sliding scale pricing for employees of partner organizations. His comment implied that he was already thinking about her as a potential employee rather than just a temporary consultant. You're assuming I'll want to make this arrangement permanent, Maria observed. What if I decide that business consulting isn't the right fit for me? Then you'll have gained valuable experience and professional connections that will help you with whatever path you choose next. Robert replied pragmatically. But I have a feeling you're going to discover capabilities you didn't know you possessed. The confidence in his voice was both encouraging and slightly unnerving. Maria had spent months focused on basic survival, and the transition to thinking about career development and long-term planning felt almost surreal. The possibilities Robert was describing seemed too positive to be sustainable. Can I ask you about something that's been bothering me? Maria said, shifting Diego to her other arm. Why are you willing to invest so much time and energy in someone you met by accident on an airplane? This level of support feels like more than simple kindness. Robert considered the question carefully before responding. Partly because my Aunt Lily spoke so highly of you in her letters. She saw something special in you, and I've learned to trust her judgment about people. He paused, watching Maria's reaction. But mostly because I recognize potential when I see it, and I believe you have the ability to make significant contributions to this kind of work. What kind of potential? Maria pressed, genuinely curious about how others perceived her abilities and prospects. Leadership potential, Robert said without hesitation. You have the intelligence to understand complex problems, the empathy to connect with people who are struggling, and the determination to persist when things get difficult. Those are rare qualities, especially in combination. The assessment felt overwhelming and slightly unrealistic. Maria had never thought of herself as a potential leader, having spent recent months focused on basic survival rather than personal development or career advancement. I appreciate your confidence, she said carefully. But I'm not sure I see those qualities in myself. Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping up with immediate demands. That's exactly what I would expect someone with leadership potential to say, Robert replied with a smile. People who are genuinely capable of leadership usually underestimate their own abilities, while people who overestimate themselves rarely have the substance to back up their confidence. The conversation was interrupted by Maria's phone ringing. With a call from Miguel. Her brother-in-law's voice carried better news than she had expected, with updates about insurance settlements and projected timelines for restaurant repairs. The insurance adjuster was more helpful than we anticipated. Miguel explained. We should be able to reopen in about 6 weeks, assuming we can find reliable contractors. I also talked to 3 other restaurant owners about temporary work for you, and all of them expressed interest in meeting with you. Maria thanked Miguel for his efforts while privately feeling conflicted about her level of enthusiasm for returning to restaurant work. The days spent observing the tutoring center had opened her mind to possibilities that felt more meaningful and promising than waitressing, even if they also felt less certain. That's wonderful news about your brother-in-law's restaurant, Robert said after Maria ended the call. It sounds like you'll have multiple options to consider. Yes, Maria agreed, though her tone lacked the excitement that such news would have generated just a week earlier. It's good to know there are backup plans available. But you're not as excited about restaurant work as you would have been before today, Robert observed accurately. Today changed your perspective about what kinds of opportunities might be available to you. Today made me realize how much I miss being intellectually challenged, Maria admitted. Restaurant work is honest and necessary, but it doesn't use my education or create opportunities for professional growth. Then let's structure an arrangement that gives you the best of both worlds, Robert suggested. Continue with the consulting work while keeping your options open with Miguel's restaurant. That way you can explore whether this educational work is truly the right fit without burning bridges with other opportunities. The proposal felt reasonable and practical, allowing Maria to test her interest and aptitude for business consulting without making irrevocable commitments. It also provided financial security during the exploration process, reducing the pressure to make quick decisions based on immediate needs rather than long-term goals. "What would that look like practically?" Maria asked. "How would you structure a consulting arrangement that accommodates my other responsibilities?" "Flexible scheduling focused on results rather than hours," Robert replied. "Some weeks might require intensive work when we're evaluating potential acquisitions or developing new programs. Other weeks might involve minimal time commitments while projects are in development phases." "And compensation?" Maria felt awkward asking about money, but her financial situation required practical consideration of any work arrangement. "Competitive with what you could earn in restaurant work, with performance bonuses tied to successful project outcomes," Robert said. "Plus benefits including health insurance and childcare support." The offer was more generous than Maria had expected, addressing her immediate financial needs while providing security for Diego's well-being. It also represented a significant investment in her potential, creating pressure to justify Robert's confidence in her abilities. "I'd like to try it," Maria said finally. "I want to see whether I can contribute effectively to the kind of work you're describing." "Excellent," Robert replied with obvious satisfaction. "We'll start with a formal evaluation of 3 more tutoring centers this week, then move into strategic planning for potential acquisitions." As they concluded their discussion and prepared to return to the guest house, Maria felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension about the path she was choosing. The consulting work represented an opportunity for professional growth and meaningful contribution, but it also required her to develop skills and confidence in areas where she had limited experience. "Thank you," she said as they gathered Diego's supplies and her notes from the day. "For the opportunity, for the support, and for believing I can succeed at something I've never tried before." "Thank you for being willing to take the risk," Robert replied. "I have a feeling we're going to accomplish something significant together." The walk back to the guest house was quiet, with both Maria and Robert absorbed in their own thoughts about the collaboration they were beginning. Diego slept peacefully in Maria's arms, unaware that his mother's life was taking another unexpected turn toward possibilities she had never imagined. As Maria settled Diego into his crib and prepared for bed, she reflected on how dramatically her circumstances had changed since arriving in Denver. The desperate flight from Miami had somehow led to opportunities that combined her passions for education and helping families with the potential for professional advancement and financial security. The work ahead would be challenging, requiring her to develop new skills while managing her responsibilities as a single mother. But for the first time since Carlos's death, Maria felt hopeful about building a future that involved more than mere survival. 3 weeks later, Maria stood in the conference room of Robert's downtown office building, presenting her analysis of the tutoring center acquisitions to a room full of investors and business partners. Diego sat contentedly in his high chair beside her, occasionally babbling as if adding his own commentary to her presentation. The scene would have been unimaginable to her just a month ago, yet it felt surprisingly natural now. "The demographic trends clearly support expansion into these markets," Maria concluded, clicking to her final slide. "Hispanic enrollment in Denver public schools has increased 30% over the past 5 years, while available tutoring services have grown by only 8%. The demand far exceeds current capacity." The investors asked probing questions about implementation costs and projected revenues, but Maria found herself fielding them with confidence she hadn't known she possessed. Her weeks of research and site visits had given her comprehensive knowledge of the business model, while her educational background provided credibility that pure business analysis couldn't match. Robert watched from the back of the room with evident pride, occasionally catching Maria's eye with encouraging nods. Their professional partnership had evolved seamlessly, with Maria's insights proving invaluable for structuring acquisition, deals and planning program expansions. She had discovered an aptitude for strategic thinking that surprised them both. "When can we begin the integration process?" asked Patricia Williams, the lead investor in their education portfolio. "The market opportunity is clearly compelling, but timing will be crucial for maximizing our competitive advantage." "We're prepared to move forward immediately," Robert replied, stepping to the front of the room. "Maria will be leading the operational integration as our Director of Educational Services. She oversees staff training, curriculum development, and family outreach programs across all acquired centers." The title was new, announced for the first time during the meeting. Maria felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness as the magnitude of her new responsibilities became clear. She would be managing programs that served hundreds of families while overseeing a team of educators and support staff. After the investors departed, Robert approached Maria with an expression that combined professional satisfaction with personal warmth. "That was exceptional," he said simply. "You've mastered complex business concepts in 3 weeks that typically take consultants months to understand." "I had excellent guidance," Maria replied, gesturing toward the comprehensive training materials Robert had provided. "And the work itself is fascinating once you understand how all the pieces connect together. There's something else we need to discuss," Robert said, his tone becoming more serious. "Something personal that affects our working relationship." He glanced around the empty conference room before continuing. "My daughter Rebecca is flying in from Stanford tomorrow. She's been following our project through my updates, and she's eager to meet you." Maria felt nervous anticipation at the prospect of meeting Robert's daughter. Their conversations had revealed how important Rebecca was to him, and how much her opinion influenced his decisions about education-related investments. "What have you told her about me?" Maria asked. "That you're brilliant, dedicated, and exactly the kind of person our programs need to succeed," Robert replied honestly. "But also that you're someone I care about as more than just a business partner." The admission hung between them, acknowledging feelings that had been developing but never directly addressed. Before Maria could respond, her phone rang with a call from Miguel. Her brother-in-law's voice carried excitement as he shared news about the restaurant's reopening schedule and his plans for a grand reopening celebration. "We'll be ready to reopen next Friday," Miguel announced. "The new kitchen equipment is better than what we had before, and the insurance settlement allowed us to renovate the dining room as well. I'm hoping you can be there for the reopening." Maria felt a complex mixture of emotions as she listened to Miguel's plans. The restaurant represented the original reason for her move to Denver, but it now felt like a chapter from a different life. Her work with Robert had opened doors to possibilities she hadn't known existed. "Of course I'll be there," Maria assured him. "I'm grateful for everything you've done to help me get established here." She meant the gratitude sincerely, even though her path had taken unexpected directions. "I also wanted to discuss the job offer again," Miguel continued. "Business should be strong with the renovations, and I can offer you better hours and pay than we originally discussed. What do you think about starting as assistant manager instead of just waitressing?" The promotion was generous and reflected Miguel's confidence in her abilities, but Maria found herself hesitating about accepting restaurant management responsibilities. Her consulting work had revealed aptitudes and interests that made returning to food service feel like a step backward. "Can I think about it over the weekend?" Maria asked. "I want to make sure I'm making the right decision for Diego's future." "Of course," Miguel replied, though his tone suggested he sensed her reluctance. "Take whatever time you need. Family comes first." After ending the call, Maria turned to find Robert watching her with a concerned expression. "You're not enthusiastic about returning to restaurant work," he observed accurately. 3 weeks ago, Miguel's offer would have been exactly what I needed," Maria admitted. "But working with you has shown me possibilities I didn't know existed. The tutoring center project feels like something I could build a real career around." "Then why do you seem conflicted about declining his offer?" Robert asked gently. "Because accepting help from you feels risky in ways that working for Miguel doesn't," Maria replied honestly. "If our professional relationship doesn't work out, I'll have given up a secure opportunity with family." Robert nodded, understanding. "You're protecting yourself and Diego, which is smart. But I want you to know that my commitment to this work extends far beyond our personal connection. The programs we're building will succeed because they're needed, not because of any relationship between us." The reassurance helped, but Maria still felt the weight of making decisions that would affect Diego's security and future opportunities. The consulting work was more fulfilling than anything she had done professionally, but it also required her to trust in possibilities rather than certainties. What would happen if I accepted Miguel's offer, but continued consulting part-time? Maria asked. "Would that compromise the tutoring center project?" "It would slow our progress," Robert acknowledged. "But it might also give you time to build confidence in your new skills while maintaining a safety net." He paused, studying her expression carefully. "What would make you feel most secure about Diego's future?" The question forced Maria to examine her motivations and fears honestly. Her attraction to the consulting work was based on its intellectual challenges and potential for professional growth, but her reluctance to fully commit stemmed from deeper anxieties about depending on opportunities that seemed too good to last. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," Maria admitted. "For you to realize that I'm not as capable as you think, or for circumstances to change in ways that eliminate these opportunities." "Those fears are understandable given what you've been through," Robert replied compassionately. "But they're also based on assumptions about scarcity rather than abundance. There are more opportunities available than you realize, especially for someone with your combination of skills and experience." Their conversation was interrupted by Rebecca's unexpected early arrival from California. Robert's daughter entered the conference room with the confident stride of someone accustomed to academic and professional environments. But her expression softened immediately when she saw Diego playing with blocks on the floor. "You must be Maria," Rebecca said, extending her hand with a warm smile. "Dad's told me so much about your work with the tutoring centers. I'm Rebecca Chen." Maria was struck by the family resemblance between Robert and his daughter, but also by Rebecca's obvious intelligence and genuine interest in the educational programs they were developing. At 22, she possessed a maturity and focus that reminded Maria of herself at that age, before circumstances had forced her to prioritize survival over professional development. "I've been following your project from school," Rebecca continued, settling into a chair near Diego's play area. "The integration model you're proposing addresses systemic issues that most tutoring programs ignore completely." The conversation that followed revealed Rebecca's sophisticated understanding of educational theory and her passionate commitment to working with underserved communities. She asked penetrating questions about Maria's background and approach to bilingual instruction, demonstrating both intellectual curiosity and genuine respect for practical experience. "I'm graduating next month with my master's degree," Rebecca explained. "I've been planning to move back to Denver and look for work with nonprofit organizations, but Dad mentioned that you might need help developing teacher training programs." Maria felt simultaneous excitement and intimidation at the prospect of working with someone so academically accomplished. Rebecca's expertise in educational psychology would complement Maria's practical teaching experience perfectly, but their different backgrounds might create challenges in establishing effective collaboration. "What kind of teacher training are you interested in developing?" Maria asked, genuinely curious about Rebecca's vision for improving educational services. "Programs that help educators understand cultural context and family dynamics," Rebecca replied immediately. "Most teacher preparation programs focus on curriculum and classroom management, but ignore the external factors that affect student performance. The response revealed thinking that aligned perfectly with Maria's own observations about the challenges facing Hispanic students. Rebecca's academic training provided theoretical frameworks for understanding issues that Maria had experienced firsthand, creating opportunities for developing more effective educational approaches. We should schedule time to discuss program development in detail, Robert suggested, clearly pleased by the immediate connection between Maria and his daughter. But first, let's celebrate the successful investor presentation and welcome Rebecca home properly. The celebration dinner that evening took place at an upscale restaurant overlooking downtown Denver, but the atmosphere remained relaxed and family-oriented despite the elegant surroundings. Diego was welcomed warmly by the staff, who provided a high chair and special attention that made Maria feel comfortable rather than self-conscious about dining with an infant. "Tell me about your plans after graduation," Maria asked Rebecca over dessert. "Are you committed to staying in Denver, or are you considering opportunities in other cities?" "Denver feels like home," Rebecca replied. "And working with dads. Education ventures would give me opportunities to implement ideas that might take years to develop in traditional nonprofit settings." The comment revealed Rebecca's pragmatic approach to social change, preferring strategic impact over idealistic but ineffective gestures. Her perspective resonated with Maria's own growing understanding of how business principles could be applied to educational and social services. "There's something we need to discuss as a family," Robert said, his tone becoming more serious. "Maria, I've been thinking about your concerns regarding job security and Diego's future. I want to propose an arrangement that addresses those issues directly." Maria felt nervous anticipation as Robert outlined his proposal. He suggested establishing a formal education services company with Maria as operations director and Rebecca as program development manager. The structure would provide employment security while allowing them to pursue contracts with multiple organizations rather than depending solely on the tutoring center acquisitions. "This would give you equity ownership in the business," Robert explained. "Not just employment, but actual partnership in building something significant." The offer was more generous than anything Maria had imagined possible, representing not just financial security, but genuine opportunity for professional advancement and wealth building. It also reflected Robert's confidence in her abilities and his commitment to their long-term collaboration. "What about Rebecca?" Maria asked, concerned about accepting opportunities that might disadvantage Robert's daughter. "This is a family business, and I don't want to interfere with plans you've made for her future." "This was Rebecca's suggestion," Robert replied, smiling at his daughter. "She believes our combined expertise would create competitive advantages that none of us could achieve individually." Rebecca nodded enthusiastically. "Your practical experience with the target population combined with my academic training in educational theory could revolutionize how these programs are designed and implemented." The partnership proposal felt like validation of everything Maria had been working toward since arriving in Denver. It offered security for Diego, while providing opportunities for professional growth that extended far beyond anything she had previously imagined possible. "I'd like to accept," Maria said finally, "both the partnership and the challenges that come with it." The celebration that followed felt like a true family gathering, with Rebecca immediately embracing her role as Diego's honorary aunt and Robert beaming with satisfaction at the successful conclusion of their business planning. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Maria reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this point. A desperate flight from Miami had somehow led to professional opportunities, financial security, and relationships that felt like the family she had lost when Carlos died. "Thank you," she told Robert as they gathered their belongings, "for seeing potential I didn't know I had and for giving me the chance to build something meaningful." "Thank you for being brave enough to trust in possibilities," Robert replied. Tomorrow we start building something that will help hundreds of families while creating the kind of life you want for Diego. The future stretching ahead felt bright with possibility, filled with meaningful work and genuine relationships that had grown from a chance encounter on an airplane. Maria Santos had found not just a new beginning, but a new family and a purpose that would define the rest of her life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.